I was 5 or 6 when we finally took the Jeep up on what is now our ranch. And I remember being struck by how beautiful it was. Even as a 5-year-old boy, like I'm not really aware of raw beauty, right? And I think that day is forever in my mind.
You're a second generation winemaker because obviously back in 1990, your mom and dad opened the vineyard. That's an accurate statement?
Accurate, yeah.
Tell me a memory or a lesson you learned from growing up in a winemaking family.
So a lot of second generation kids are a hybrid like me, where we didn't grow up in wine country. We didn't grow up running around the vineyard. So I grew up down overlooking San Pedro and Long Beach in Southern California and Rancho Palos Verdes, and went through high school down there in LA and then off to college. But my earliest memories of the wine business, number one, my dad and mom would take off to the Napa Valley wine auction throughout the 80s. So I was born in 82. And I remember I must have been like 4 or 5 years old. And my sister and I were staying at our grandparents' house. And they lived further up the hill. And I could see the train of jets landing in LAX, and I was just like couldn't wait for my parents to get home from Napa Valley, and just standing in my grandparents' front yard waiting. I bet that's mom and dad's plane, kind of like what I did Christmas Eve. I bet that's Santa Claus coming. That star up there, that's the sleigh. But as my dad began looking for vineyard land, about that time, he had narrowed down his search to limestone. Because when realtors heard of a lawyer from Long Beach looking for vineyard land, the vultures gathered, right? And so my dad, almost as a way to ward them off, so do not, like, send me a photo of the chalk, send me a soil report of limestone, send me the geological survey map. And my earliest memories were we would stay with my aunt and uncle in Paso Robles in Ballard Canyon, use that as a home base. And then in my dad's Jeep, that ended up being my first car, we would bounce around and meet these cowboy realtors. And a lot of times it'd be bait and switch where, my dad would just be like, we'd wind up in East Paso on a flat, who knows what, just, grazing land, scorching hot. And my dad would just be pissed. Like, really? Like, you're wasting my time with my family on a weekend showing me this flatland bullshit. And, but I was 5 or 6 when we finally took the Jeep up on what is now our ranch. And I remember being struck by how beautiful it was. Even as a 5-year-old boy, like I'm not really aware of raw beauty, right? And I think that day is forever in my mind because the mustard and the brush was so high. We couldn't, unless we were on a little dirt track, we couldn't see in front of the hood. And my dad was trying to make his way up to the highest elevation, stopped, took a couple of photos, and then coming down, we had no idea how steep this hill was. And we started sliding and kind of up on the front right tire. And I was sitting right behind my mom in the passenger, and she was in the passenger seat. I remember being like on top of her, belted in though. And she was screaming at my dad. And I think that near rollover crash, the very first day we went on onto the property, really cemented that day in my head. And then I remember my dad shaking hands with the old cattle rancher, and that is actually important because I remember that handshake. And then what happened a couple days later, the Prin family from Chateau Beaucastel arrived, and they had been looking for limestone near the coast as well. And the cattle rancher then tried to back up and get a bidding war started, and they walked away and bought Tablas Creek, much warmer climate. So their narrative is that's actually perfect for the Southern Rhone varietals, right? They're from Chateau du Pop, Chateau Beaucastel. And then my dad came back in 1990, and there had been a dip in the economy, and it was cool to show up then as an 8-year-old and be like, geez, Dad, you bought this giant ranch. You just got a little storage shed. The first really intense memory I have is meeting Marcos Solorzano, Ruben's older brother, and he worked out of this shipping container, and we had a John Deere parked next to it with a diesel tank and a gas tank, and then my dad quickly figured out that if he let my sister and I ride around on the ATV, he could actually have a meeting with Marcos and plan out the next couple of weeks. And I remember Jeff Newton, who put this all together with my dad. He's a great vineyard manager. I remember him being just like palpably nervous that my dad was just letting my sister and I rip around on the ATV, and never had any crashes or anything. And then soon
it's the 80s, right? There you go.
Right. But and so any weekend I didn't have a soccer tournament or something going on, we would be up there. And it was, growing up in Southern California, I didn't have that thought at the time, but now looking back on it, I fell in love back then because it was just getting out of the city, hanging out with Marcos and Ruben, the crew's kids. Pretty much every time we'd be up there, Ruben would throw an after work barbecue. And the coolest generational shift I've seen is, having those memories of playing with the children of the crew, and now watching my kids play with the children of the crew. I'm like, wow, there has been a generational shift, because my dad's still alive and kicking and, more of a character than ever. So there hasn't been, a succession. But it's really cool now and now my kids being the third generation, they are now growing up in wine country.
Tell us your website, tell us your social media, tell us any way we can learn more about Stolpman and taste your wines.
Yeah, stolpmanvineyards.com. And then we both have Stolpman Vineyards and Stolpman So Fresh on Instagram. And please come and taste in Los Olivos, or email us if you're coming, if you want to check out the vineyard. Love to do every month. I do vineyard hikes, and throughout the year, it's really fun to just show, talk about everything I'm talking about dry farming and about food thinning, and look at these tiny little clusters right now that are flowering, and pray that there's no major wind events in the next couple weeks. And it's just really cool to be out there and actually hike the hills and look at every different varietal and the way we train it, the way it naturally behaves. So come visit and buy the wine and love it and buy more of it, and then I'll keep making it.